Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Delegate Bill Castro. It's so interesting when we have people come on, they show up as my name.
I know I just noticed that. But you know what? It's not a bad name. I'll take it.
All right. You're welcome to have it.
I'll
Are
change
you,
it.
I was gonna say, are you able to rename yourself?
Yeah, I'm on it.
Great.
How you doing today?
Oh, it is Friday, and
Yeah.
I've
Love
had a week.
Friday.
Um, I'm apparently behind on the times. I didn't even know the Equality Act passed yesterday. That's how
Yeah.
out of the loop I have been from social media. So.
That's not a bad thing to be out of the loop from social media every once in a while.
Yeah, well, I think I need to reconsider my stream or feed because I definitely watched videos on Rand Paul's comments during the recent Senate hearing. So um,
Got
got to see that piece.
it. All the highlights.
Yes, yes.
CP, that was such a good job getting the OAG involved in the bill.
Um, I think they Jer called me about it. Because
Wow.
they had some questions, and then I talked to him about it for a while yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. And then he's like, okay, yeah, let's write some testimony.
Wow. That's so great.
It's impressive.
Um, I don't know how to make I'm getting a bunch of emails about that bill right now, and that's why I keep getting like sounds in the background. I'm trying to make that go away.
Some of them might be from me.
Okay, well, that's not bad.
I submitted my testimony, which
Yes. That's like, so that's the most stressful thing in this whole process, at least for me in my first year, is making sure everyone has their testimony in, because I can only control what I can control. But it's like music to my ears when I hear people say, I got my testimony in. So thank
well, and
you.
it's like such a narrow window. And then also for things like this, where the hearing is next week, but you have to sign up this week.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
yeah.
That's what
Yeah, and we keep getting hammered with that for my first bill because we're new. We we were 5 days out from my first bill hearing, and Tyler and I were looking at the calendar, and 5 days out we felt fine. Well, I'm looking at the calendar. I'm like, is it business days? Are weekends included in this? And so we started doing the math 2 days prior to a bill hearing, and we're like, no, it's today. We have to get it in today. So we had to really quickly get the troops rounded up, get testimony submitted. It was we learned some hard lessons that day, but yeah.
Well, hopefully my written testimony is vaguely coherent. I had another hearing this morning in JPR that I had to do prep for and then testified. And so not that I was not prioritizing this bill because I was doing work on it all week.
You're good. I put Tyler and I think we just have a lot of heartburn from our first experience. And so we just really hammer people down for testimony and chase them down. So probably more than we need to, but it just makes us feel better.
Yeah, a good chunk of the time I was planning to spend this week writing my testimony ended up being time redrafting the bill.
Okay. Well, I do. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Yeah, it'd be good to, I don't see any barriers now that the clerks are on board and the OAG is on board. I feel pretty good about it. So,
well,
yeah.
I think now that we're at 1:30, we can go ahead and just jump right in and maybe, we're now live streaming. I will also want to confirm that we are successfully live on Instagram today as well for the first time. We are attempting our sort of multi-streaming initiative. And so you can say hi to IG out there. But yeah, I'd love to actually, why don't you go ahead and start us off with talking about the efforts to modernize marriage and birth certificates in the state of Maryland.
Yeah. So you want me to start, right?
You or CP, whoever, I mean, do we even,
okay.
I don't know the bill numbers offhand. So I'm
no, you're good. You're good. So it's HB 1203. And this bill came to us, or to me originally, from a constituent who reached out because her child was issued an amended birth certificate because her father is trans. And, she was really frustrated because she was involved in the efforts to make sure that you can get birth certificates reissued that are not amended, be issued a new birth certificate. And she's like, I thought we fixed this. Why is this still happening? And I'm like, yeah, I thought we fixed this too. I don't know what's happening. So we started doing some research looking into it, and we recognized we didn't fix it. And there are still some loopholes in the law. So we wanted right away, I reached out to you guys, and I'm so thankful for all the work that you've put into this bill with me. You've been really great partners in this effort. But we've crafted a bill to make sure that when a child of a trans parent is issued a birth certificate, it's not amended, it's new. But additionally, the bill is also going to loop in marriage certificates. So if you want to change it right now, and this, I learned this from you, if you want a new marriage certificate, there are clerks across the state that are saying that you either can't do that, or you might have to get divorced and remarried to get your name on your on your marriage certificate. So obviously that's hugely problematic. As soon as you told me that, I recognized how hugely problematic that was. So we're looking to address that within the bill.
So the hearing for that is on Tuesday of next week in the House Health and Government Operations Committee. So we will have more information about that next week after the hearing.
So I think now that Delegate Acevedo is with us, why don't we go ahead and go around and just do quick introductions. Tell us who you are, where you're from, who you're representing, and just kind of say hi to the audience. And then I'll get us started kind of with laying out the agenda.
I'll jump in here first. My name is Lisa Bell Castro. I am very proud to represent District 11 in Baltimore County. I'm on the Health and Government Operations Committee, and this is my first full year in the House of Delegates. Very excited to be here.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel Acevedo. I am the state delegate for District 39, which is the northwestern part of Montgomery County. I serve on the House Appropriations Committee, which oversees our state's capital and operating budgets and a number of other agencies, and on the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. I'm in leadership on the Legislative Black Caucus, the Legislative Latino Caucus, and proud to be a member of the MoCo delegation and the LGBTQ+ caucus, and with my good friend and new member, Lisa. Great to be with you all.
Thanks. And for those of you that don't know, my name is Jeremy LaMaster. Pronouns are he and they, and I am the Executive Director at FreeState Justice, LGBTQ legal services and advocacy organization in Maryland.
I am CP Hoffman. I am the Legal Director at FreeState Justice, and my pronouns are they, them.
All right, awesome. And so today, just as a kind of preview for folks that are with us and tuning in, we're going to do some quick updates of highlights from this week in session. I know CP has been particularly busy on a number of fronts, and definitely would love to hear updates from UCP on both the ban on panic defense, as well as where we are at in the name change publication waiver updates. I can also kind of give some brief updates on the Inclusive Schools Act, and I'll definitely would love to hear from our delegates on anything that anything notable for them this week in session that they'd like to share out. And then after that, we'll probably just move into a conversation just talking more generally about public service and how you all came to it, and then just where you're at and sort of your reflections on being an LGBTQ state legislator. And then we'll wrap up with hopefully a preview of the things to come, and can talk a little bit more about how folks can get involved. So CP, do you want to kick us off and just kind of update us on those pieces that you're carrying up for us?
Yeah, sure. So I will start with the name change publication waiver bill, because I had a hearing on that this morning in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. Now that's in the Senate, it is Senate Bill 581. I want to say the House bill is House Bill 39. Basically, for those who have not joined these calls before, don't necessarily remember, this would allow for automatic waiver of the publication requirement in name change cases where a request is made by the petitioner to waive publication. would be hugely beneficial to not just the transgender community, but also individuals who've experienced domestic violence or have other concerns that they don't want publication as a condition for getting their name changed. So the hearing this morning in the Judicial Proceedings Committee went pretty well. We had a number of advocates there. The committee seemed to have a very good response to what we said. We got one question from Senator Casserly, basically asking like, well, I have to sometimes do like searches to find people who've like disappeared from creditors, and the creditors looking for them, and is this going to affect my ability to like search for them? We answered, well, this won't affect like the fact that these cases are still listed in the judicial case search. You can still pull up the docket under the person's former name and look through and see that their name was changed. And then also frequently, they're copied into commercial databases and such that aren't necessarily, Googleable, but, there are ways to find the information. My sense is that he seemed reasonably happy with that answer once we sort of explained it to him, and no one else on the committee seemed hostile or negative at all. So I'm very optimistic that we will see movement on this bill. On the House side, I don't remember what the last thing we updated you on was, but it has passed the House with, I want to say 131 to 4 votes.
You are correct.
It was definitely 4 votes against. I don't remember the precise number 4. But it was an overwhelming majority. So we're hoping for something similar in the Senate. We're very optimistic. The other bill that I've been working on was the panic defense ban, which again, just to remind people, would eliminate the ability of criminal defendants to claim that they panicked when they discovered the sexual orientation or gender identity of the victim of crime. So that if you murder a trans person because they're trans, you could not claim, oh, I panicked upon discovering their trans status, and that somehow mitigates the fact that I killed them. So the hearings on that bill have happened in both the House Judiciary and the Senate Judiciary committees. They were a few weeks ago. They've been basically in subcommittee in the meantime. The exciting news is that the House subcommittee is going to be talking about the bill on Monday, and we expect to vote Monday afternoon from the subcommittee, which should then hopefully move things forward on the House side. Again, this is a bill that last year when it was brought up, it passed the House, again, with overwhelming support, but it did not get a final vote in the Senate before the legislature shut down. We're optimistic that things will move forward.
I know Virginia, they just passed theirs, or at least their Senate did. They passed their ban, or got out of the Senate yesterday, I think. So definitely.
Yeah, it looks like Virginia is going to slightly beat us to this. But they're in Maryland's defense, the Virginia legislature has a shorter session than we do. So they sort of had to get everything done slightly faster.
Well, I know for me, our week was kind of my week is kind of preoccupied with the Inclusive Schools Act, and I know there was a House hearing, floor vote yesterday, I believe, right, delegates? Yes, I'm seeing, and so I unfortunately was not available to watch, and so I don't know if you have any thoughts or feedback on how the floor vote went. I know it passed, but wasn't sure if there was any other kind of updates from your perspective of I'm assuming what you voted in favor. Like I said, I would hope so. I didn't check in with you, but I assumed you were going to vote in favor. So I don't know if you have any updates from the House floor.
I'd say there's not much other than the usual Republican transphobia and just this, these queer folks have an agenda. when in actuality, our agenda is just to wake up, live, survive, thrive, and repeat. So that was, other than the usual Republican transphobia, I think the bill just passed, and it was a really good bill.
Yeah, I know, Delegate Wilkins kind of reached out around, just talking points to kind of, in anticipation of, anxieties over trans girls being allowed into all girls institutions. So I definitely was apprehensive of how, at least, I think for me, the challenging part is, even though we kind of knew that things are going to pass, it's still challenging to kind of have, that kind of hate and trauma kind of exist sort of in some of our public spaces and in our legislature. And so I'm hoping that, we get further and further away from folks sort of being able to use these platforms for that, to that end. But I'm glad at least we got through the House. And so now for the Inclusive Schools Act, next stop is the Senate and making sure things happen there. And so really big shout out to ACLU Maryland and to the Maryland State Educators Association and really kind of moving this forward as well. It's definitely been very challenging to kind of work on this one. So, yeah.
And I think just as an addition, as an organizing point for diverse communities, but particularly Black communities, I think it's important to constantly point out that you have institutions, really storied institutions like Spelman College and Morehouse that recently changed their policies to allow admission to trans women into Spelman College and trans men into Morehouse College. And these are historically Black colleges and universities that are, institutions that really have a storied history in our community. And so I think that was not only powerful, but it's really a point for us to be organizing around to basically say, look, our higher education institutions, from traditionally white institutions to HBCUs are being inclusive. This has to be reflected at all levels of education, right? Primary, secondary, tertiary level. So.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. That's not something I had actually even really thought of. I came, before moving to Maryland, I, worked at Rutgers University and particularly Douglas College, which used to be a women's only, element or institution under the Rutgers umbrella. And while in my time there, that's something that we had moved forward and initiated was, ensuring that enrollment was open to trans women and non-binary folks, and that,
yep.
We weren't going to be discriminating in that capacity. So that's a great point. I didn't even thought about that. I like looking at our higher education institutions as sort of a model.
Yeah. And one of my good friends, London Darushala, a trans woman who does a lot of work in organizing in Baltimore City, she was actually a part of that effort because she graduated from Morehouse College, and she was working with a number of folks in the Black trans community and pushing that. But yeah, really proud of her. I think she's on the Baltimore LGBTQ+ commission, but really great work that we should be highlighting and using as an organizing point in various communities, but particularly, Black communities.
Delegate Belcastro, did you have any highlights from your weekend session you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would have to say, Delegate Acevedo and I just hopped off the floor, and I'd say that today was pretty notable. We just, we voted to expand the earned income tax credit to those that file taxes with an ITIN number. The Republicans tried. We were on the probably for an hour. We spent debating it and going through their different amendments for them to try and water it down. But I'd have to say it's significant. I teach in a school with a high population of undocumented, with those within the undocumented community. And we keep saying this phrase that the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected those across the state. And when we keep saying it over and over again, it kind of can lose its meaning. But I just want to say it again to really hammer it home. This COVID-19 pandemic really has disproportionately affected those across the state. And I've seen it firsthand. So I'm just really proud of Maryland that we found a way. It wasn't easy to do, but we found a way to get some much needed, deserved relief to the undocumented community in Maryland. So today was a big day, and I think probably for me, the highlight of the week.
Any other highlights from you, Delegate Acevedo, you want to share out?
No, Lisa covered it, and she's absolutely right. But I'm also happy to see that we're in a place now where, obviously there's work still to be done around LGBTQ plus protections, rights, equity. But as someone who's, been doing like LGBTQ plus organizing since college in Maryland, and around the DREAM Act and transgender equality, it was a lot of opposition and there was a lot of disorganization, and even within our own community, and this is something that we saw that there was sort of like a split because there really wasn't a focus on, quite frankly, the people who have always showed up for this fight, but we've always forgotten, and that's our trans siblings. And to see also that split, to see, just some of the policies that are still outstanding that we've been pushing for a long time, took, a really long time back then, but is not only getting traction, but we're seeing so much engagement from our community. And I think that's something to, to be hopeful, to note, and for us to be proud of, right? I mean, we have an LGBTQ plus caucus now of state legislators, like Lisa's doing a phenomenal job. You have other members who've been there before I got there, right? And we should be leveraging that power, but we should also be comfortable with seeing ourselves in these spaces, because we deserve to be in these spaces. Anywhere that they talk about us or make decisions that impact us, we have a right, and we deserve to be in those spaces.
And for me, that actually kind of segues really nicely into really my first question for the two of you is kind of what led you initially into public service, and actually too, like just kind of hearing about how do you, now that you're here as well, how do you balance it with your other commitments and work? Really would love to hear more on that.
I'll go first. For me, I've never been a political person. Well, I'm a political person now, so I guess I can't say that anymore, but it was never part of the plan. It was never part of the dream. 9 years ago, I started my teaching career in Maryland. And on my first day, I learned that I was going to be teaching in a hallway, and mind you, special education students in a hallway. It just set me on this path right away. I knew that something was significantly wrong. Somewhere along this path that we're all on, something went significantly wrong when it comes to education in Maryland. And so it set me on this path of learning the functions of the school board, learning the functions of county councils, the function of state government. And I learned pretty quickly that those in elected positions hold a lot of the cards when it comes to making those changes within our schools. So it led me to helping run campaigns of those that have made promises to fully fund education, and quickly it just spiraled into this opportunity where I'm just so thankful to be within the House of Delegates and in the legislature. And my colleague Delegate Acevedo mentioned how important it is for people to be in spaces where the decisions are made. And I just want to say that teachers also need to be in places where the decisions are made that impact our students, impact education. And I'm really proud to be in a position where I can serve educators, students, and schools. You mentioned how do you balance public service with the other work? And I would say that it is a very delicate balance, and it's certainly not an easy balance. Something that's really important to me is mental health. And I would say that I have a really strong sense of myself and a strong sense of what I need to keep myself mentally balanced. For me, my zen is nature. I'm a huge camper, and I'm never nervous to say that. I loved any opportunity I can to talk about camping. I like to do it. But even though I have a large amount on my plate, I often just pack up my car and take my work on the road and into nature. And through this pandemic, I've had the opportunity to teach my students virtually from a number of different parks across the state and within the area. They've joined me on virtual bike rides, and we've done virtual trail runs. And so what I'm trying to say is I keep that balance by bringing things that I love into my work And that way it just doesn't feel so much like work. So if I can offer any advice to anyone, it's just that it has a lot on their plate. Find what that Zen is and find a way to make work not seem like work. It's not an easy thing to do, but I promise that it's worth it. And that's how I kind of balance everything.
So CP, I'm hearing that we need to start doing walking meetings maybe, or jogging meetings.
You should. Totally should.
I know that Ezra sometimes is walking during some meetings, but
yeah. Oh, you're right. That
Zen.
is true. Well, you know what? I'm gonna try this out. I think you're inspiring me to.
Good.
You need to get yourself a treadmill desk.
It's not the same because you're not in nature. It's more, well, all right, my Zen is nature, whatever, maybe your Zen is walking on a treadmill. So I won't judge and try and put you in a box.
So Delegate Acevedo, I would love, same question really. What brought you to public service and how are you balancing it?
Yeah, and first, let me just say, like, give it up for LGBTQ plus educators, right? Because we need that, right? Our kids need to see themselves just as much in the curriculum as they see themselves reflected in educators. And so I'm just always happy when we hear from LGBTQ plus educators. So give it up, Elisa. But to the question, what brought me, I think, you know, I'd never planned on running for office, but I was always doing organizing and advocacy work. The way I, you know, advocate and the work that I do is largely informed by my experiences, who I am, where I'm from. And as someone who is an immigrant, who is Afro-Latino, who's queer, right, formerly working poor, that, you know, informs my advocacy and the work that I do. And so from my time at Montgomery College, I was doing organizing work, not just on campus, but off campus on LGBTQ rights. And so I really got an opportunity to do that, you know, paid when in 2012, we were pushing around marriage equality. And it became a, you know, a very divisive issue. I was working as an organizer on the Question 4 and Question 6 campaigns, which was marriage equality and the DREAM Act. Maryland was the first state to pass the DREAM Act, both legislatively and at the ballot box, as well as marriage equality. And so, you know, being able to be a paid organizer and to do that work of organizing various communities around you know, just the fundamental right to be treated equally under the law, right, for LGBTQ plus people. And so that sort of, you know, evolved into like policy work and advocacy work around Fight for 15, economic justice. And then later, you know, working with groups like Black Youth Project, Black Lives Matter Network, and whatnot around police transparency and accountability, an issue that we were sort of organizing around before in 2014, but really things took off in 2015 when we saw the national protests and unrest over the killing of Michael Brown and a number of other folks, from, you know, Tamir Rice to Rakia Boyd to Laquan McDonald and so many other folks, right? Including Black trans folks that are killed, misgendered, and then not covered in this total numbers when we talk about violence, police violence against Black and Brown folks. And so just doing that work, you know, just constantly doing it, not just, you know, out of love for my community, but out of necessity, right? You know, we all do this work really out of necessity, because if we don't, you know, the system would not dismantle itself, and the very people who benefit from it, yes, some of them are allies, right? I prefer the term co-conspirator, right? If we're being serious about, you know, standing with LGBTQ plus folks, but this system would not dismantle itself. And so we have the responsibility to do it, because we have to do it out of necessity. If we don't fight for lesbian rights, you know what I'm saying, that means that lesbians are less protected under the law and a danger. If we don't fight for trans rights, if we don't fight for LGBTQ plus rights, our youths, our seniors, etc., it means we are in danger. So we do it out of necessity. And so that's what I would say. I never planned on running for office, was always an organizer and someone who was pushing from the outside. But there was a vacancy in my district somewhere where I did a lot of my organizing work. And so it was at that point I said, well, look, you're the person that you've been looking for. And, you need to do this for a number of reasons. And I decided to run. I ran against a slate. I ran against folks who, in essence, saw me as, anti-establishment, radical, etc. And we not only took the message to the people, but I was authentic, and my community knew me. And so I was proud to not only be the top vote getter, but to now serve District 39 and the LGBTQ plus community in the House with my friend Lisa.
So that, and I'm trying to think of how to kind of frame this, and because it is interesting how folks kind of move into are like that pathway to public service. But I'm kind of curious, how can we kind of cultivate that a little bit in others, and especially for like our community members, the LGBTQ community, and I would think even specifically too, not having trans or non-binary legislators currently in our state as well. Are there things that we can do as allies and fellow community members to really support each other and kind of pushing folks into public? I don't want to say push. This push is a hard word, but I guess just all right, get in there. Good luck. But something like, I guess, what are things that we could potentially do? I think CP and I as advocates, right, to kind of help people get into this space.
Well, I think about how I came to this space, and it was because someone reached down and pulled me up and said that this is a space that I can be in, and they showed me the way, right? So we need people who are willing to reach down and mentor people, because especially from the trans community, because we need to crack that glass ceiling here in Annapolis, right? So we need to be looking deep. We need to find people that have passion, that are willing and wanting to raise their voice. And we need to start now and find ways to get them here in the legislature.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. I'll just also add that, queer youth and queer folks can't be what they can't see. And so visibility is a big piece of that. It's a big piece to more folks from our community running, because we need to see ourselves in power, right? We need to see ourselves in positions of decision-making where we're not just legislating or being executives, but that, our youth can see that, and that is something that is normalized. And so we no longer see these spaces as exclusive to cis heterosexual folks, but that, as James Baldwin once put it, our crowns have already been bought and paid for, right? All we have to do is wear it. And the people who have come before us have done the work of ensuring that we should unapologetically be in these spaces as ourselves. And that's how I show up, right? But the way we get more folks in office, more LGBTQ plus folks, is one, it's visibility. Two, to Lisa's point, it's definitely about reaching back and mentoring folks. We need to pour back into our community just as much as we hold members of our community accountable. But we also need to be intentional about our investments in trans and non-binary folks. As I said earlier, these are the people who have been on the front lines of our movement and continue to show up. But we have neglected, we have not listened to them. And as a result, we see, this continues to be members of our community who exist not, well beyond the margins of society, right? But it has to start with visibility, and it has to be mentoring and investment, intentional investment.
We have an interesting question that's related to this that's in the Q&A. I'll read it out. says, in Cecil County, a Republican county, we're having an issue getting people to even run. Many recommend running as a Republican just to get into office and then either changing party or working as a moderate. I feel there must be a better path. What would you recommend is the way to find those who could run?
That's a tough one, especially I think we're both kind of quiet, trying to figure out what that path might be, especially in a Republican district. I'm kind of at a loss right now. Delegate Acevedo, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, well, I will say this. I'll say that there are a number of offices that LGBTQ plus folks can run for, right? There are nonpartisan races as well as partisan races. And when we think of power, we need to think of it at every single level of government, federal, state, local, because every single decision that is made at these respective levels impact our lives. When we talk about inclusive schools, you know, who's on our boards of education, and these are nonpartisan boards and commissions, right? Who's our sheriff when we talk about the overcriminalization of our community? Who's our state's attorney, right? Who's our city council member, right? There are a number of positions. And so, you know, I would encourage folks to, you know, take a look at the political landscape. And if you're in one of those counties or districts that are conservative, there are a number of other positions, nonpartisan positions that you can run for, that you see other LGBTQ plus folks have done across the county. I mean, you know, we just elected lesbian sheriff in, in Arizona, where you had the former sheriff who 45 exonerated was the former sheriff, right? So we got to think of other positions. Now, you know, I have my own views about LGBTQ plus folks running for like sheriff and, you know, like these various positions. That's a separate conversation. But my point is that there are other positions where you are needed, right? And it does not necessarily have to be state representative, mayor, a council member. It could be board of education. It could be supervisor. You know, it could be advisory neighborhood commission, where we just need to ensure that we are in spaces of decision making.
And a lot of times, like, those are the spaces that have the least representation from our community. You know, like, we are severely underrepresented in school boards and you know, a lot of these neighborhood advisory commissions and things, because there's such a bias towards like traditional families, when like people make decisions for who to elevate up and recommend to run.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too, because I think too, you're really highlighting, you know, a lot of the work that we do at FreeState as well is not, you know, when we think of policy and advocacy, a lot of times it's not happening in the General Assembly, right? There's a lot of other paths that we pursue and kind of work with different agencies and commissions just on improving, you know, conditions in a bunch of different spaces. And it definitely, I think, is helpful when you do have community members in those spaces, right? Whether they're county clerks or things like that, right? And so you definitely, I think that definitely is a great point. But I think for me, the other challenge though too is just you know, even the spaces, you know, it's hard. I think what for me is in thinking about some of the barriers, right, to public service is that you know, for folks that are of low or limited income or are sort of marginalized in other aspects, right? I think, you know, public service is a commitment, and it takes time and energy and money and among, you know, kind of to get into these spaces. And so not necessarily a question, but just kind of thinking, you know, out loud of just, you know, how do we make public service more accessible for people as well, you know, and instead of just, all right, you know, rise to the challenge necessary, you know, to be a public servant, you know, how do we also make it more accessible and approachable for communities? So
yeah, to Lisa's point, mentoring, you know.
So I'm forgetting what my next question was. I thought I had a good one, but so I guess just in general. So I think you all are just a few years. Well, Delegate Belcastro, this is still year one? I can't recall how long. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting.
That's okay. I had 9 days last session. So this is my first full session.
Yes.
9 days, in those 9 days, that's when COVID was breaking out. So
I
came
know.
right in the thick of it.
I remember that. I felt so bad, police. I was like, man.
You just started.
Yeah, it's all good. You know, coming out of this, everything's going to be downhill from here. It's going to be a cakewalk once things get back to normal.
But you spoke on the House floor, right, Lisa? You spoke on a bill. I remember that, even in the short time period. You know, very vocal.
When you have an opportunity to speak about the Kerwin Commission or the blueprint, I couldn't pass that up.
So I guess my question then too is just thinking, and Delegate Belcastro, this kind of came up for me a little bit when we were in the hearing it was on the age of consent for mental health services. So I don't have the bill number in front of me, but I think for me, it's, this is also my kind of first time in session as well, kind of coming in as an advocate more routinely and regularly. And I think in almost all hearings, and I'm sure CP can definitely attest to this for sure. Just some of the challenges is kind of being queer in those spaces. And so I'm kind of curious from your all's perspectives, on being LGBTQ legislators, do you have any observations or reflections of, what is it like to exist in, kind of these difficult hearings or settings or just kind of in people that you work with and need to collaborate on? I'm kind of curious to hear what your reflections might be as queer legislators.
So I think I remember what you're referring to. There is someone, and my Delegate Acevedo might be familiar to this as well. There's a couple people that are frequent flyers in all the different committees this session, just going and spreading anti-LGBTQ rhetoric in each of these different hearings. And there comes a point where you can only hear so much before you feel like you need to say something about it and stand up and say something about it. And, he struck this one particular person really just struck a nerve with me. People don't come out because it's trendy or it's the cool thing to do. As he said, we're doing all this work to create safer spaces so that people can come out at a younger age, so that people can be comfortable in their own skin. And it just frustrates me how this certain person was equating people coming out more within schools and at a younger age because it's the trendy thing to do. So, it is difficult to navigate those waters, but I will say there's also a positive to being an LGBTQ member of the legislature. I think about the journey that my wife and I took when we first wanted to get married. We weren't able to, and she's a UK citizen. I wasn't even able to sponsor her for a green card to come to America. So we spent these painful 2 years apart. And it was that visibility of seeing those within the legislature working to pass marriage equality in the state of Maryland, those working at the federal level to get the Supreme Court to strike down the Defense of Marriage Act. That's what kept us going, right? Knowing that this was coming, that this was in the pipeline. And so it's an honor to serve with legislators like Delegate Acevedo and to be in a position to continue this journey that all of us are on in the LGBTQ community. And it's also an honor to be in a position to put legislation forward that moves the needle forward for the LGBTQ community.
That. I mean,
covered.
Yeah, that's it. That's why we're here. I mean, Delegate Belcastro is definitely spot on with that. I would say I just look at policy. I sit on the Appropriations Committee, just ensuring that when we talk about our state's budget, we're not just talking about our state's values, but we're also being intentional about where we're investing those dollars, right? In communities, especially that have historically been left behind by policy and budget decisions, right? And so I always see my role as ensuring that I am fighting for the funds that our community needs for whatever services that we need to provide to ensure that we're all thriving. Right. And so my first session, I was really happy to work with Delegate Maggie McIntosh, who's also a member of the LGBTQ+ caucus. And this is why representation matters and why It's important for folks like Delegate Belcastro and Delegate McIntosh and others who are in positions of power to be there, because we are in the room, right? We're in part controlling whether it's dollars or conversations. And so I was really happy to work with Delegate McIntosh to ensure that we secured funding for LGBTQ plus youth homelessness through the Department of Housing, because that year what the governor had done was allocated money for homelessness, but the budget language was generic. And so what that means then is that agencies can in essence use this for a number of homelessness efforts. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be focused on ending homelessness, right? And ending poverty. But I'd like to see some intentional investments in LGBTQ plus homelessness. As we know, our youth account for 40% of the nation's youth homeless population. And when we break down that number, a majority of them are LGBTQ plus folks of color, trans and non-binary folks, right, who are living on the streets, come out, kicked out, and resort to survival sex and are victims of survivors of exploitation as well, right? So it was really good to be able to do that. And that's just how I always see my role, whether it's with policy or whether it's with dollars, what is coming back to our community and how can we get as much back, right? Because for a community that historically has been, disinvested and underinvested, simply put, we need to be a little bit more, forceful in what it is that we want.
And I think that kind of actually relates to one of the questions that someone just asked us. So the question is, there are many grassroots efforts for the LGBTQA plus community out there, each a bit unique, but many wanting to do what is best for our community. What would you say is the now/need that we could direct our efforts towards? And I'll just kind of add on to that is I know, I feel like CP can attest this as well. It feels like all issues are LGBTQ issues at the end of the day. I think we're zooming in out of like, all right, there's a healthcare, we care about medical debt because LGBTQ folks are disproportionately impacted by medical debt. We have to care about education because of the vulnerability of LGBTQ youth. We have to work on aging services. That's another bill of yours, Delegate Osavera, right? Because of our LGBT. So it's like it feels like we're pulled in every direction, right? So what I guess from your perspectives are some of these now need priorities for our community, especially when we feel like we're stretched so thin, right?
Yeah, I will just quickly before the delegates jump in. I will say that the way that I view this is that the most pressing issues for the LGBTQ community are largely, by and large, the most pressing issues for the larger community. That if we want to improve the lives of LGBTQ Marylanders, we need to, do things to target institutional racism and to target poverty and broader issues with schools and access to healthcare and all of these things, because these are the issues that are, and access to housing, these are the things that are creating day-to-day issues for LGBTQIA plus Marylanders. That said, there's only so many things that like we as an organization can focus on at any given time. So it's very hard. And I certainly, looking at this legislative session, like if you were to look at like the bills we're working on this year, it's largely things that have been left over from last year, aside from, the great bills that the two of you have brought up this year. And part of that is just sort of the context of how things happened last year and the COVID pandemic and all of that. But, we certainly recognize the need to get far more involved in a lot of these other issues. And that's why, we were fairly involved in the Kerwin Commission push last year and all of that.
Delegate Osavera, do you want to try and take a stab at that one?
Oh, sure. I wanted to, did you want to, or I could go?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So, and just remind me again, I think there were a couple of questions in there.
I think what is the now in need kind of issue that the community, LGBTQ community, should direct efforts towards?
So I'm gonna be a little bit. I'm gonna selfishly plug two of my bills, but two of my bills that are very relevant to this question, right? If we talk about what the immediate needs are, I would say it is healthcare and direct cash assistance. Healthcare, because we are a community where significant health disparities exist. Access to healthcare, culturally competent healthcare at that, is very difficult for us, right? And we need to recognize, some folks in our community need to recognize the privilege, right? Whether it's you having health insurance or you being able to go to a doctor that is able to medically diagnose you without you having to self-diagnose yourself and explain that to medical professionals, which is often the case with trans and non-binary folks, right? So culturally competent healthcare is what our community needs, especially coming out from this pandemic. Before the pandemic, 400,000 Marylanders were uninsured. Over 400,000 Marylanders were uninsured, a majority of whom were Black, Latinx, low income, working poor. And since the pandemic, that number has grown to over 500,000 people, right? And that is the injustice that we need to be focused on going out of this. In the wealthiest state, in the wealthiest country in human history, there is no reason why we cannot ensure that we're providing Medicare for all for every single person in our state, single payer. As I sit on the appropriations committee, as a state, we spend 1/3 of our state's budget on healthcare. 1/3 of our state's budget we spend on healthcare, right? And there's a number of things in there, right? But what do we have to show for that in terms of a healthcare system? Right? And that's what we really need to take inventory of. And so my bill, the Healthy Maryland Act, would sort of bring about that single payer Medicare for all system. The other bill is we need, when I talk about direct cash assistance, an idea I've been pushing is universal basic income or guaranteed income. And the reason why this is important, not just for low income folks, which, a lot of members of our community are, right? But when we look at the annual income of trans and non-binary folks, it's $12,000 to $15,000 annually, right? Well below the federal poverty line. So we have a whole segment of our community who are not only just constantly invisibilized, but are economically oppressed. There's no way you can live annually on $12,000 to $15,000. And if you speak to trans and non-binary folks, in most cases, particularly those who work, who are sex workers, they will speak to you about the importance and just the impact of direct cash assistance. So universal basic income is this idea, and you have folks like Andrew Yang that was talking about it. I introduced my bill before he even made it his federal campaign platform, just so you know. But what that would do is provide $500 ideally a month from the state government to Marylanders to meet their basic needs. Alaska already has it. And when we're talking about a pandemic, just imagine, what kind of an impact $500 a month would have on working people, but especially LGBTQ plus people who are on the lower end economic spectrum and, also are low income, et cetera. So those are the two things I would say.
And to piggyback off of what Delegate Acevedo said, being in the Health and Government Operations Committee, we often, any committee, right? You have all these different lobbyists, all these different people that come in and testify on bills and frame bills up in a perspective that suits the need that they're lobbying for. And we do great work at FreeState. You mentioned how you're a small organization. We need to find ways to ramp up that advocacy, ramp up that lobbying so that we can frame these issues through the lens of the LGBTQ community as we are going through these hearings. So finding a way to broaden that net, bring more people in, and being able to frame those issues in ways that they impact and how they are going to have an impact on the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. And I mean, that for me is spot on. I think, especially around, I'll start with healthcare. This was, Delegate Belcastro, I didn't in doing the testimony for the mental health, age of consent, we're lowering that. I definitely centered where research was showing that parental consent was a major barrier for youth in accessing mental health services. But the number one barrier was cost, right? And we just also submitted testimony around the medical debt collections bill, and looking at that as well, of just looking at the number of the LGBTQ community members. If you think of things like transition-related care, hormone therapies, HIV, AIDS medications, or PrEP, preventative services. These are, it's not even necessarily the prescriptions and things that will necessarily cost money, but you have to have routine care. Every 3 months you are needing to see a physician and get blood work done for a lot of these LGBTQ specific healthcare needs. And so those bills, even though they're small, can add up quickly. And so that was part of why we came out for the medical debt relief, because evidence was showing that LGBTQ community members were delaying or skipping out on physician visits, and this is part of what leads to these negative health outcomes and HIV spread and things like that. And so for me, I think that's a great point, Delegate Acevedo, there on just really healthcare really is important. And I know you and I've talked about the basic income work as well, and just kind of the work that we do. And it's like it's interesting, like part of the advocacy, like we talk about Indian youth homelessness, and like we are kind of working very high level to open up funding and to support folks. But it does feel like there is this weird, by the time the money trickles down, right, and kind of goes through whatever network or framework it's going through to actually manifest as like direct service delivery, it feels like there's so much value lost there that honestly that value may be better placed in direct cash payments, right? And that even in a lot of these programs, and I know you talked about sex workers specifically, a lot of these programs that are targeted for substance use users and sex workers and other underground economies, they're very paternalistic in nature, and not necessarily effective in the ways that they're operating. And so sometimes it is, we were kind of been doing some prelim research on what would basic income look like if we were to pilot a program. There are some pretty positive research in other places, like in Canada and other countries, that really show that if you actually care about, housing security, food security, employment, what actually might be even better than trying to address those individual services, on their own, is just providing individuals with a basic sort of getting their basic needs met, so that they then are able to, secure better access to their needs and discern for themselves what they are. So definitely wanted to amplify everything that we're saying here. Like it's like,
oh, thank you.
LGBTQ issues. So
yeah, I mean, just imagine, because Andrew Yang was advocating for $1,000 at the federal level. I'm talking about $500 at the state level. Just imagine if those two policy ideas were advanced. We're talking about people who are struggling right now, but especially our community, right? Because when every other community catches a cough, we get pneumonia, right? So folks are suffering, but we're especially suffering, right? What would $1,500 a month mean for people, right? And more importantly, this is about giving low-income people, this is about giving trans and non-binary folks agency.
Completely agree.
Yeah. I think that we are unfortunately out of time because, alas, our guests are very busy people, and we only have so much time with them today. But certainly on my behalf, I wanted to thank both of you for joining us this afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much. Definitely. We will definitely, I see a few more questions that are coming in. CP, if you and I want to stick around just for a minute, we can maybe give a quick update or preview for next week, but we'll definitely let our delegates go, and they can continue, doing the work in our General Assembly for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the work that you guys do. Thank you for the opportunity. And Delegate Acevedo, it was just absolutely delightful to do this with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you so much, CP, to the leadership of Free State, all the folks that joined us. Thank you so very much. Your work is appreciated and always good to be in conversation with you all and my good friend, Delegate Lisa Castro. And I know I speak for both of us when I say we'd love to come back. We're always happy to come back and have these, really intimate and community focused conversations. Thanks.
Bye, guys.
So CP, before I sign you up, just to talk a little bit more, are you good to go a little over just in case?
Yes, I may get a phone call in a few minutes, in which case I'll have to go off. I told someone I'd be free at 2:30, but I have 3 minutes.
Yes, what's coming up?
Yeah, so this next week, we're going to have the hearing in the House on Bill HB 1203, which we talked a bit about at the beginning of the call. It's to create procedures to get new birth certificates for the children of trans individuals and marriage certificates for trans individuals. We have worked with the Department of Health and the county clerks to try to get the language to conform to their needs. We think we have language now that will work well. The Attorney General's office has submitted earlier today testimony in support. So we are optimistic that things will move forward with that, especially since in both cases, these are designed to fill in gaps in the existing law. So we think that there's a strong case for, doing this as a, non-controversial fix. And I have a little friend who's just come to visit, apparently. This is magic.
So beautiful.
Yes.
And so I think from my end, I think we're kind of ramping up for what is, we've been calling it the Youth and Families Protection Act, but this is, oh my gosh, I lost my bill numbers on me. House Bill 1088, Senate Bill 768. So we have both of the House and Senate hearings coming up. This is massive expansion of non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ folks into a number of different areas in our code that have previously not been covered. And so we are going to be having written testimony workshops the next 2 weeks, next 2 Tuesdays. So definitely stay tuned on our social media accounts, as well as our email list. We'll be providing more details on how to get involved with that. There was a question earlier on about, how do we kind of support these efforts? And I think, getting involved with written testimony is definitely a great step one. And then once we get closer to floor votes, being able to actually contact legislators is going to be really important.
The thing that I will say there is that if your legislator is on one of the committees that's hearing one of these bills, then calling that legislator and saying, I support, this bill that you're going to be hearing, in committee next week, or whatever, that can be very, very helpful. That's often, that often will do a lot more to help get a bill passed than to call after the point that it's, reaching the full Senate or full House. It's hard to target that because everyone's senator or reps, they're each on one committee. So especially on the Senate side, you have one senator that's going to be on one committee. So there's, a 1 in, I'm trying to remember how many committees there are, like 1 in 8 chance that they're on the right committee. And if it's, on the House side, you do have 3 people typically, depending on where you are in the state, but, there's more than 3 committees, so.
No, that's a great point, actually. And I know that's something that this session, not necessarily, I feel like, as we move forward, trying to get better at, how can we set community members up to sort of readily identify who those people are, right? And so when we do have these priority bills that are going into committees, how can we activate that section of folks that are looking to get involved? And then I think before I get into the last question, any other updates, CP, that you wanted to give a shout out to?
I think that's my major update.
Great. And so we got another question about, many bills are sponsored by clubs, orgs, and other grassroots efforts. How does one do so? The Cecil County LGBTQ+ Alliance is a newly formed org that would be an excellent advocate getting the word out there, but also acting as a sponsor, and same with the Cecil County Democratic Club. With more oars in the water, it can make the journey quicker and easier. So how can we all get on board? I really love the phrasing of that question. And to be honest, I think this is a part of where, for Free State Justice, I think we started last year with like a number of new staff members. And I think we were kind of geared up to really be able to kind of expand and make sure that there was a kind of statewide coalition of LGBTQ groups. And that definitely is kind of within something, within the scope of things that we would love to see and be involved with and part of moving forward. I think COVID has kind of introduced a number of disruptions, I think, for everyone, and definitely kind of handicapped or kind of clipped our heels, I think, for coming into session. And so, but I definitely think there are opportunities for LGBT groups across the state, in different counties to be able to collaborate and work together and to kind of share information. And I think it's going to be especially important as we move forward because a lot of some of the policy priorities I think that are going to surface up are going to have to be done locally first, right? And we may not always necessarily need Baltimore City or Montgomery County necessarily to kind of be the pilots for policy before it goes statewide, but making sure that different counties throughout the state are kind of working, locally on sort of like grassroots level to make protections there. And so I definitely, any suggestions, CP, on the how to get on board?
Yeah, so one thing I will say is that while Free State is like Maryland's statewide LGBTQ organization, like every other organization plays an important role. Sorry, the cat stepped on the laptop. Every other organization in the state plays an important role also. And there's no reason that your local organization shouldn't like be involved in these issues also. And you shouldn't reach out, you should rather, to just speak very clearly, you should feel free to reach out to, your local representatives, your people in state and local government, your school boards, et cetera, to, push for the policies that are important to your community. If you think it's an area where we can help you, then reach out to us and we'll try to, help in whatever way we can. But, we're just one voice among a much larger community.
Yeah, we're definitely open for collaboration, for support and, trying to make suggestions around things that could be drafted. But you're definitely, I think your local your legislators are the ones at the end of the day who sponsor legislation, right? We can, I think as advocates and organizations, we can do a lot of the legwork and kind of setting up our legislators for success. So I think it's, making sure, reaching out and collaborating is definitely one element of that. And I think the other one is working on building relationships with legislators. So bye, CP, thank you. But we're wrapping up anyway. So thank you all for who tuned in today. Just as a reminder, you can find on our website a policy tracker. We try to kind of keep it up to date with where a number of different bills that are important to the LGBTQ community, where they are at in the House and Senate. And definitely stay tuned through social media and our email list. We'll have writing testimony workshops for the Youth and Families Protection Act coming up. It's definitely a way to get involved, to learn about the legislation and sort of get in line with how we want to be able to talk about the importance of having non-discrimination protections throughout the entirety of state services, as well as requirements around training and ensuring that any taxpayer-funded service is delivering services in a way that is culturally competent and affirming. So definitely stay tuned. And thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll definitely be here next week as we prep for more hearings. So thank you. Take care.